Spaghetti and meatballs. Spaghetti and meatballs.
Can you not?
Why not? Why not? Welcome back to Stacked episode 111, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Yes, and we're
Evelyn's in the house. It's okay. She can be part of it.
No, this will just be an added experience for the listeners. You just hear eating in the background. So it's a very meditative, it's hypnotic. Get you sucked into the listens, the conversations we're going to have today, because today's episode 111. It's episode 111, guys. So you know what that means. That means every 111 episodes, we let Brandon pick the topic for this week. So Brandon, you pick the topic for this week. What are we talking about?
I did. We're picking. We're picking. We're talking about adulthood movies.
Oh.
Well, we've been in adulthood now for years, and not just in college adulthood. Now out of college adult, we all pay rent. We've all been in relationships. We all have jobs, or had jobs. And none of us are.
My God.
And then, and also, none of us have experienced parenthood yet, but some of us are like parents to animals.
That's true.
So I think looking at films surrounding those topics is really interesting.
Yeah. Chris, what about you?
When I got pitched this, I kind of felt the same way Brandon did, where I started thinking like, okay, like what movies are about like the condition of being at this stage in your life, and like what goes into that, and Brandon mentioned, relationships, work, friendships, responsibilities. I feel like in a weird way, like that's kind of it. Like, I feel like adulthood, and when you kind of reach this age or like this time in your life, you kind of feel overwhelmed by the responsibilities that you have to yourself and others. But also like, it's also still a time in life where you're learning. You're still very much learning, especially when when you're a young adult, like we are, in our 20s. And I actually found this to be a really great topic when I started looking. I mean, like usually I'll start thinking like, okay, like this is the topic, what films fall under that. But then I was like, adulthood is such a broad, like concept. So I just went into my profile and on Letterboxd and searched up like the movies I've ranked the highest. And I'm like, dang, I could probably apply quite a number of these to this prompt. So frankly, I think you'll see a couple of really great movies, at least on my end, for this stack. I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot we can talk about here, and I feel like the condition of being an adult is something that is universal, but also a unique experience to each person.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear what all of you guys came up with for this episode. Ethan,
Yeah.
did you have any particular inclinations about this one?
I think I could start it. I kind of want to start this out with sort of talking about like what I picked. I want to talk about my first film, which is sort of like, I feel like a good way to start off talking about adulthood movies, where it is like the transition into adulthood, So, we've done coming of age movies before. That was an episode.
Yeah.
But I feel like this is a lot different because this is the next stage in that, From the traditional coming of age, it's more like, child to young adult, Whereas,
Yeah.
I want to start out my adult movie doing young adult to adult. And I'm going to start it with a movie about my hometown, Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm picking SLC Punk as my first adulthood film. I think this movie is fantastic. It perfectly captures and critiques punk culture in a town where it like clashes the most, you know? Um because it's like, it's punk anarchy culture mixed with the LDS church and, how basically Mormons dictate anything, any law that's passed in Salt Lake. It's very totalitarian. But then it's about these punks living in this really uh, repressed city, uh, struggling with their own ideology and like in living free, and if fighting the system is part of the system, and if like the sort of existentialism behind that, the nihilism behind all of that, um, and it's a really beautiful movie about realizing that like the goods and bads of being rebellious and growing and like maturing into an adult from that stage. Um, it's a fantastic film. I highly recommend you guys check it out. Matthew Lillard, Shaggy is the star of it. Um, and it's amazing. And I think that's just I think that's a fundamental cornerstone of like an adulthood movie. Is like learning about having to face it. You know.
For a second there, I thought you were going to go with Brigsby Bear. But from what I've heard about SLC Punk, sounds terrific. I mean, it's not like they're young adults or they're adults. Like, what are we talking here age-wise?
They're like end of college young adults.
Oh, so like kicking and screaming kind of age. I don't know if you watched that.
I haven't seen Kicking and Screaming. No, I haven't. But yeah, something like that. Cool. Thumbs up, Chris. What do you think?
Yeah, I haven't even heard of this movie, but I do like what you said about like the like rebellion being something that like I feel like that's something that's more often than not associated with like teenage years, especially more traditional means.
Yeah.
But also like young adults, I feel like have the most reason to be angry with the world because they're old enough to comprehend what it is, like the situation and all that, but are also young enough to fight and young enough to seek out that future that they want in place of what it is. Which I feel like is why you often see young adults at the forefront of social change rather than like old ass fucks who like are probably gonna bite the dust before any real change happens.
Yeah.
And yeah, I find that really interesting, and I think that's a good way of putting with all that's going on around the world these last few years, I think that's a good way to contextualize why adulthood is often in defiance of the social norm, especially when you're a young adult like us. I buy it. Absolutely.
Definitely recommend it. Does anyone have a movie just to bounce off that one?
I'm trying to think of I'm trying to think of like a movie that like complements that in terms of like rebellion.
Or just even like the transitionary period,
I would say like Good Will Hunting might be a good one.
Ooh.
Because it's not necessarily about somebody who's in school,
No.
coming to terms with like adulthood and leaving and then having to figure things out on their own. It's about paths to take and your expectations that you are under in a society where they kind of flaunt you around like you're some object with your knowledge. And in Good Will Hunting, Ben Affleck gives, well, not Ben Affleck, but the world gives Matt Damon a choice. You go to school and use your knowledge to speak with people, or you can go work with your brother for the rest of your life, essentially.
Yeah.
Or best friend for the rest of your life in construction and waste your talent. And he chooses neither in the end.
Right.
But I think the significance of it is that you are still seeing him contemplate these massive things while also going to therapy, which is actually very forward thinking, I think, for like a film of that era.
Absolutely.
So,
man.
especially for an adult man.
This movie's so good.
It is very good.
Oh my, yeah, this one's one of my all-time favorite movies. And yeah, for some reason I didn't have it on my list. I don't know why I didn't even think of it, but like, sort of, those decisions that Matt Damon makes in these movies are decisions that like determine who you are in your 20s. Not in terms of like the outcome, but in terms of how you decide, you know? Um so no matter which one he chose would have put him on a path to like uh as a like just personality wise like changing him, you know? Um but this movie's so good. Ben Affleck, when he's telling him these choices, I know why you slipped up because you were thinking that scene, right? Where he's like, "If you come like tomorrow, I will beat the fuck out of you. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I will beat you up." Um, and it's just like, oh, there's so much passion rooting for this guy for his potential, but that can also be a pressure, you know, where he just wants to be whoever he is. You know, I feel like there's so much expectation from your peers in your 20s when you're deciding what you're going to do next with your life, you know? And I think this film perfectly captures it. Excellent film.
I actually do have another one on top of that for similar sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's this movie, my third favorite movie of all time. None of you guys have seen it yet. The Best of Youth. That 6-hour Italian movie.
Oh yeah. Tell us about it. I don't know anything about it. You
Yeah,
gave
me neither.
Joey your DVD for like weeks.
I was going to, but he didn't watch it, so I was like, well,
So you took it
and
back.
he did. I took it back. I said, "This is my third favorite movie of all time. You can't
He said,
do this to me."
"Harumph." Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is this movie so good?
Well, so it starts out for like the first like half hour, sort of developing this relationship between two siblings
Yeah.
who are going down their respective life paths for school and life, and they decide to take a vacation before going off to school like forever, you know,
Yeah.
and then moving on with the rest of their life. And on this summer trip, they run into this woman, and she's obviously got something up with her. She's running away from something, and they kind of tag along with her.
Mm-hmm.
And after the moment where they get separated, one decides to go on the vacation, and then the other one decides not to go on the vacation for a different reason. And they sort of both splinter off in their own separate directions from being like late teens, early 20s.
Yeah.
So in what is supposed to be the capping off of their adolescence, they are instead forced into two different life paths. One moves to a different country and begins to like travel the world and drops out of school, and the other one goes in a different path from school than he initially thought he would.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to see their lives unfold in adulthood for 30 to 40 years throughout the course of the 6-hour movie. They got time. And you get to see how their lives intertwine, intersect, but also go apart from one another in terms of their politics, in terms of their relationships with people, in terms of their careers. And I've never seen something like so real in capturing reality as it is, without it being artificial or melodramatic in any way, but still not being boring. Incredibly engaging and entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, it just the way it breathes with life and shows your adulthood. I could see parts of myself in like the early parts of this movie, which makes me fearful and excited for how it's turning out, because it's like, not saying like, oh, my life's gonna go exactly like these guys, but I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
these are things that I've since thought since watching this movie, and I don't think that this movie implanted those ideas in my head.
Oh, whoa.
And so it's very well made. It's a masterwork. It's super long, so if you watch it, probably split it up into the first 3 hours, second 3 hours.
Yeah.
I have 2 DVDs, so that makes it sort of easy. But it's outstanding and a like quintessential adulthood movie.
Whoa. It sounds like kind of like Boyhood in a way. I haven't seen Boyhood, but I know enough about it, you know? Do they film it like that, or is it just like you know, just one year? Or okay.
He's munching.
He's
One
mentioned.
onion ring. No,
One onion ring.
they-
One cookie.
No, No, they used the same cast, and I think they filmed over a while, like maybe a year or two, which is longer than most productions. Is like most, as we know, being in the industry, most television and film productions only are about a month to 3 months long, unless it's like a big blockbuster like Avatar, The Way of Water,
Yeah.
or Endgame. But with this, they shot it over, I believe, a longer period of time within like 2 to 3 years. But they did. It was not like Boyhood, where it was like, okay, we're gonna get together in another 5 years and film another piece of it, or another year and film a piece of it.
Right.
So they utilized the same actors throughout, but they utilized makeup. They utilized the changing of settings, hairstyles, costuming, everything around them to change them.
Right.
And you believe it, and you go with it. And I think that's definitely a brave decision, because I think most movies would just recast the role. But living with them for 6 hours at a time, or I guess in this case just the 6 hours, and just being able to see that change,
you'd really get to know them.
Yeah, exactly. Versus it being like a flashback to a younger version of the character.
Yeah.
And it's just the same person. It makes it more consistent. I'd be very curious to see what you guys would think about it, but I adore this movie. So
I'm no stranger to long, more than 3 hour movies. I broke up Napoleon. I did an hour a day. Took me a week. I could do that with this one. That's like, for some reason I feel like adulthood movies are very like because it's more than just coming in age. Movies are very specific into like one moment that changes them, but I feel like adulthood, it takes longer to see the change, and a movie that I think is very similar to that, God, look at this segue, is Worst Person in the World. I think is a quintessential adulthood movie when talking about relationships and discovering who you want to be, and staying true to yourself. It is such a beautiful movie, and it just feels so real, like the screenplay is just like, it's so natural what the character's saying and how the actors convey them, that you're just like, oh my God, like I just feel sucked into this person's life, and watching her like go through multiple relationships and what she learns about herself and from them, and like just how, like, who she becomes by the end of it is just like such a beautiful journey. Brandon, what about you? Do you have anything to say?
Yeah. I mean, it didn't impact me as much as it did you two.
Yeah.
But I think when it comes to seeing a relationship decay and evolve with time, that is the most unique part about it. And I think it does capture a very unique side of millennialism, which is like growing up after, and I it's not just exclusive to America, I think.
Right.
I think we can group all the generations together in terms of that. Because unfortunately, I feel like a lot of there are a lot more boomer progressives and Gen X progressives than there are millennial, and then there are in the U.S. versus foreign.
Yeah.
So,
where is this going?
What I'm saying is I think in terms of how people are in foreign countries, just because that's the case doesn't mean that millennials are any different overseas. I think
right, okay.
Wow.
We're back to reality. We're talking about Worst Person in the World. Brandon, I get what you're saying, because you're saying millennial mindset is
universal.
Is universal.
Yeah. And I think that's great that this movie covers that aspect, because it's like, just because there are boomers and Gen Xers that it's the same. Okay, it's the same, but there's more progressive ones over there.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the experience changes for millennials because we grew up with different technology. We grew up with different ways of relationshiping.
Yeah.
Versus there is a more traditional form of marriage relationships working everywhere before millennials and Gen Z.
Right.
And I think that's very interesting. And I think that this movie captures that both in its structure and in terms of how the characters work. Now, Chris, do you actually have anything to say about this?
Chris,
movie?
I think you have a lot to say about this movie on second. Now that I'm thinking about it.
Well, I think like one thing is that Worst Person is a movie that I think we've talked about this movie at length multiple times throughout this show. But I think one thing that has always stood out to me about this movie is how authentic it conveys itself. And like I've always found that I remember walking out of this movie at the end of it and kind of feeling, you guys ever feel that feeling of like validation when you see a movie that really speaks to you?
Absolutely, dude. You're just like, oh
Yeah.
my god.
And
I universally feel seen, you know?
yeah. And like I think that what works most about this movie, among many things, is that the story that the main character goes through and like the interactions she has with all these people in her life across these few years that this film kind of tracks her, they're all very universally understandable things. The like whether that be like her relationship with this guy that didn't work out and then starts dating this other person and it's like this rush of new excitement,
Yeah.
but then that doesn't work out and then she kind of like there's like a grieving process that she goes through with like not only her relationships but with this person that she had at a time like imagined settling down and being in a family with. And and I think that's something that I think Worst Person works best if you're like in your 30s, because I think that's kind of like the target. And millennials I think are definitely the target in here. But I think even for us as like Gen Z people, and granted Gen Z is like we're early Gen Z, so like we have like moments where we breach into the other side of that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like everything works. It's a very emotionally charged film, but I like how understated it is, relatively speaking. It's not like overly explosive in its visuals and stuff like that. I actually thought it was very subdued, which I really love about it. Yeah, beyond that, that's pretty much it. Like this movie works on levels that like because I can see why this film can be seen as very disparate, where it's like there's all these different things in this person's life, but like but I always kind of felt like it all consolidates by the end into this portrait of a person who is just trying to make do, if you know what I mean. Especially at the end where like we kind of have a time jump and we see that she has moved forward in her career, but is still kind of like not fully satisfied, but kind of gotten to a place where she's like getting by. But honestly, like at that age, that's fine. Getting by. Throughout life, if you're getting by, that's all it should be.
Yeah.
And like stability in life is more and more turbulent as I think you get older and until you eventually reach that full level of stability.
Yeah.
But I feel like this movie like shows what it's like to be lost in that world. And I think that's a feeling that even if you're not in that generation, you can probably understand. Yeah, that's something that I really felt when I watched this movie.
Yeah, it's a brilliant film. Chris, you haven't picked a movie yet. Do you want to pick one?
Yeah. Why don't I throw in? I guess I'll throw in. This movie's similar in tone. I don't even know if I've really talked about this movie. But it's a movie on this show. Maybe I have once. Varda's Cleo 5 to 7. I adore this movie.
I haven't seen it yet.
So, Brandon, have you seen Cleo? I don't think you have.
Shaking his head.
So Cleo from 5 to 7 is fantastic. I think is it her highest viewed film? I think it is her highest viewed film on there. But yeah, it is. So Cleo from 5 to 7 is a movie about this woman named Cleo who, at the beginning of the film, is awaiting test results, like health test results, and is kind of just trying to quell her anxieties while she's waiting to get this phone call or what have you. Um, and the whole thing about this movie is that through the entire movie goes by and we don't know the result of this. The movie is more about how does this person being confronted by the potential of their loss of mortality, or their own mortality, I should say, and how does that affect them? So Cleo in the beginning of this movie is very much someone who, she's kind of a materialist in a way. I think she has a very like self-centered view of herself and the world. And by the end of this movie and this journey that she goes through as she kind of treks through Paris, she starts to unravel herself and she starts to kind of come to grips with this idea that, you know, all these things that she's placed desire and all these things are like material wealth and these kind of superficial aspects of her life. And I feel like this movie ties into this idea of adulthood really well because it's a movie about this person learning what's important to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's a movie about kind of settling away the bullshit and kind of finding what is important to you, which I think is kind of the name of the game when it comes to adulthood. Yeah. Where you're trying to kind of like trim out the hedges and figure out like, hey, this is where I want to direct my life. This is where I don't want to put things in my life towards. Mm-hmm. And I think Cleo from 5 to 7 does such a good job of articulating what it is to be an adult. And by the end, I'm not going to spoil the ending, but by the end, like regardless of the answer, she's happier. You know what I mean? And she has a more gratified sense of her existential sense of self. And I think that's something that really moved me when I saw this film. Yeah, that's why I'm throwing this one in here. Before I move on, I want to throw in one more movie.
Yeah.
We were talking about, Ethan, you were talking about rebellion earlier and like kind of being awoken to that phenomena as an adult and what it is to like kind of be confronted by like these larger than life social conditions and being forced to kind of grapple with it. So I'm going to throw in a movie that Brandon has seen and really likes. I actually have a slightly higher rating than him on this. And Ethan, I think you'd really like this. Jang Hoon's A Taxi Driver.
I haven't seen it.
Brandon, back me up on this.
A great movie. Great journalism movie.
This is a very good journalism movie. Okay, so this movie stars Song Kang-ho. So also, honestly, might be my favorite Song Kang-ho performance.
Really?
And that's a high standard for this guy. Yeah, I really like him in this movie. The movie's about a lot of different things, but the essential pitch, basically, is this taxi driver who lives in Seoul gets paid by a foreigner to drive him down to this city called Gwangju, where there is mass social unrest. And this movie kind of treks its way through this character kind of being thrown into this world and kind of having to like come to grips with that, if you know what I mean. And I know that sounds kind of like not reductive, but like kind of just like, okay, like guy learns the world's not a great place, like, okay. Yeah. But the movie communicates its messaging about the social issues at hand with such a intense level of like emotional heart. And also the one thing that really stands out to me about this movie is how the main character is like he's consistently being presented with these things that challenges the comfort of the life that he already lives. And I think that's really interesting because especially when you kind of tie that back into the whole adulthood thing, and I think an experience that we can all share in is that and Ethan, we've talked about this at length, the whole like thing with how the internet has provided our world with so much capability and ability to do amazing things and connect each other.
Yeah.
But it also has forced us to confront things that at like not even 20 years ago, like would have been like, whatever, other side of the world, I don't care. But now it's like, it's real. You know what I mean? And being confronted by all this stuff and being forced to grapple with it. I think this movie explores a phenomena that is not only like universal in time, but also like specific enough that you can apply that to what it's like becoming an adult in today's world.
Yeah, dude.
Um, Ethan, I think you dig this one. I think you might find it a little
Generic.
hammy at
Yeah.
points. Yeah. It is it's quite a basic film, but it articulates it with just the right stuff to I think warrant how like close to its chest it plays its cards.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. It doesn't reinvent anything, but it does what's known incredibly well. And I think you dig that.
Yeah.
Brandon, do you have anything you want to throw in about this movie since you've seen it?
I don't think it needs. Okay, this film lives in a place where it kind of walks you through it as if you were like alongside the
If
people
you're with
involved.
him.
Yeah. And there's no hand holding in that sense, other than to let people know who may not be understanding or knowledgeable about history in that region to know what's happening. And it doesn't do it with a shy eye, because I know some movies that are about important times in history, important events, important movements, they'll kind of sanitize it to make it more viewable to the masses. And yeah, I think it is PG-13, but I honestly didn't feel like it was sanitized at all. And that lack of sanitization of characters, of moments that are really kind of brutal, already frames it as this is an adult story. And it doesn't sugarcoat anything. And I think in adulthood, we shouldn't sugarcoat, because the training wheels are off.
Yep.
We live in a society that we are involved with politically by voting and by participating in protests and by all these different things. And I think Taxi Driver does a really good job at not needing to make it more viable for a more universal audience in terms of age. And in that sense, like, you could, because of the content, you could view it and be like, I don't need to be an adult to watch this. But it is quintessentially adult in that sense, because the people are independent.
Yeah.
And it's so scary, you know, that scariness of independence is there, especially with the protests that went on during that time in that area.
Mm-hmm.
So, and another thing I noted that wasn't a personal thing, was in adult movies, we need to tackle the tough truths, but also find the exciting freedom.
Yes.
Of things, because there is a restrictiveness that you might feel as an adult at first, because you have to make a living, but then you're able to find yourself through aimlessness and more time, because most people, their time is taken up by school or other responsibility. But once you get past that other responsibility to your free time, there is so much more to that in life for an adult. So I don't know if there's any films that match that description for you guys, or if Ethan wants to say anything on Taxi Driver or what.
I got one that matches that. Sort of like about how to come with tough truths about growing up, getting a job, but this one also has to deal with race in adulthood and dealing with race. And I'm going to be talking about Sorry to Bother You, which I think is a really great adulthood movie, that where we have Lakeith Stanfield's character sort of have to face these tough truths about the world and how it's controlled and what methods they use it for, you know, that speaks outside the frame of the film, and sort of him coming to terms with how to accept that, and yeah, at the same time, how to fight against that, you know? So we have Steven Yeun's character that like is sort of like the guide to this, you know, because he wants to like start a union within the telemarketers, you know, and that leads to protest. And then Lakeith Stanfield, he rejects it at first. He was a scab, right? He crossed the picket line, and he shows how much of yourself you have to sacrifice, your own dignity, like how much that stuff you have to sacrifice to go up in the world. And it's really sickening, but then he also like learns how to fight against it in the end, which I think is like so good. I love this movie to death. We did this for a movie night once, right?
Yes, we did. We did. That's when I saw it for the first time.
Yeah, it's awesome. What do you guys think?
Hmm.
This is a really pensive episode of Stacked, everybody. Sorry for the lots of dead air.
Grappling with
if you could
adulthood
see
is a lot.
if you could see all three of us, we're all like tapping our chins and stroking our chins, going, "Huh."
We're all like
These are
stroking
deep
our
questions.
beards.
Yeah,
I mean, financially, I agree, because it gives him this, when he is a scab and he does improve. It doesn't really. It does what the corporations want. The idea of a union, a revolution, sort of falls apart initially, because he's so good at his part of the job that it doesn't matter that there's a union strike going on.
and his
And
job is using
that-
a white voice. You know,
Right. And that's super interesting, especially now with the Writers Guild strike going on. It's
Yeah.
just super topical.
Mm.
And I think it's an incredible depiction of what that excess wealth and capital will do for you in adulthood, but also how it changes who you are as a person,
yeah,
and kind of
Yeah.
power corrupts. If we're talking about narratives like that, that also goes along with it.
We were talking earlier about how I was talking earlier about like being confronted by all these like large social issues in this part of your life, where when you're a kid or like even a growing teenager, it kind of feels like the consequences of the real world are beyond you. You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't gotta worry about that. I just gotta worry about school, like you said, Ethan. But I think another thing that this movie does really well, and many films have done this, but to varying effect, but I think Sorry to Bother You nails it, is the intertext between race and economics, especially in the United States, across the world, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I think this movie speaks so closely to what is a vitally American issue.
Yeah.
And I think this movie does a great job of bringing forward this message, and while also like this movie's also funny as hell. Like the ending,
It's so funny.
fallout of this movie. Like I'm
Yeah.
like, what in the and like because like Riley has this really like absurdist humor to him that I think he leans into really well, while not diluting the social messaging or just like the fun of the characters through any of it. And I think this kind of like these like what might initially seem as like a haphazard clash of tones
Yeah.
works really well, oddly enough. And I can't really pinpoint a specific reason as to why, but it does. And this movie's really funny and fun, but also like one of those movies that like really gets you thinking in a weird way, kind of like Wolf of Wall Street, in the way that the funniness and absurdity oddly enough complements like the social messaging that goes on in the background. But in this way, it's in the forefront because it's a very direct film.
I think it's also kind of like Beau is
yeah.
Afraid in terms of its comedy. You know,
I can definitely see that. There's
In
like
terms of
a
its dark
there's like
comedy,
a yeah,
it's
a little
abrasive
zany
and dark,
and out there.
darkness, but played
Yeah.
for laughs. You know, it's crazy. What else do people got? I got one more, but I want to hear more from you guys. What do you got, Chris?
I'll throw in another. I'll throw in this one just really quickly. We've talked about this movie a billion times, but I think this movie is really important for me as an adult. I promise I'll make this quick because we talk about this movie all the time. Big
Yeah.
Lebowski.
Oh,
The dude has the ultimate adult philosophy, in my opinion.
yeah.
Basically, like, and I'll make this quick. So the whole thing with what makes, I think, the dude such a compelling protagonist, and in relation to this theme of adulthood, is that the dude's whole shtick is he just goes with it. His whole thing is maintaining his own inner tranquility and not letting these giant like things beyond him get him down. Now, of course, like it's important to participate and be socially aware and help and do your bit.
Yeah.
Of course, absolutely. But when it comes to like as an individual person and how you deal with being confronted by all this stuff in life, just sit back, do some bowling, drink a White Russian, drink some bowling,
It's fucking.
But you know what I'm saying? Like it's
Yeah, man.
I think like yeah, it's just going along with it and like just being a good person, stay out of trouble, That's okay, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that's why the slacker lifestyle that is the dude has become so iconic, and honestly, one that a lot of people can also very easily emulate.
Yeah.
It's not a hard concept to grasp in that regard. And I think that's why this movie has stood the test of time, even beyond its comedy. I think that's why this movie is so like, it's just like, yeah, if I was confronted by fascists, I'm chilling. You know what I mean?
What? Wait, no. We don't want to give that
No,
message.
I'm kidding.
If you're confronted by a
but
fascist,
you know what I mean?
punch them in the face. All right. Let's just make that clear.
Yeah, while they burn
you're
your car.
fucking thrown down if you find a Nazi or a fascist.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying. Just kind of going.
You
along
still
with
keep your inner tranquility.
Complacency.
You still keep that inner tranquility when you're punching them in the face. Is what Chris is trying to say.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
When you throw a bowling ball at their chest, you know. It teaches a good lesson in optimistic nihilism.
Yes, it is the ultimate optimism.
By parroting what people think nihilism is with those fascists. They're not even fascists. They just say they're nihilists, but Walter just keeps calling them fascists because they're German. They could be fascists, but they just never confirm themselves. But just like accepting that what is and what isn't, you know, is a very like positive nihilist thought, optimistic nihilism. You know, that's what I subscribe to, and this movie does it perfectly. You know,
surely.
Oh, Chris, I'm so proud of you.
Cool.
Look at you picking Lebowski all the time like that. It's one of the best movies ever made.
Brandon, throw a movie in. It's been a minute.
Well,
toss in a little bit.
Unconfirmed
little thing.
Multiplicity.
Is that the Ryan Reynolds?
What?
When he's like multiple people?
No. It's Michael Keaton. It's from the 90s.
Oh.
It's a comedy drama where this guy that goes, a dramedy, where a guy goes to a scientist to help him with his project, and like it's a construction project, and Michael Keaton's character is a dad and a construction worker.
Yeah.
And the guy invites him into his lab and is like, "Hey, have you ever like struggled with like time and your management of time?" And as an adult, when I think about the balancing of time and the struggles we have of seeing friends,
yes,
and raising a family, I guess in this case, raising a podcast,
our sweet baby boy broadcast,
and going to work, and the guy clones him, and as a result, he's able to send one to work and then send one to work at home. But he doesn't know which is the original, a la a little Netflix miniseries that Ethan and I watched called Living With Yourself, starring Paul Rudd.
And Brandon, now add a third to this trilogy that you need to watch, and it's called Severance, dude. It plays with this, and you gotta watch it. It's the best out of the three.
And people get jealous because they don't know. They want their own agency. It's natural to humanity. But it's also, the theme is there's never enough time, which is why I love time travel movies, like About Time, another great adulthood movie in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But in this film, it's like almost a struggle. I mean, yes, they play with the comedic presence of him trying to cover up the fact that there is a clone that looks like him. But then there's increased dramatic stakes because it's one of those stories where it's like, be careful what you wish for.
Right.
And I love that concept because it allows us to play with the things that we may want to do in theory, but in action, it's like, oh, there's some real drawbacks here, huh? And it involves his clones making other clones without his consent.
What?
To balance more time so that they have time off because they feel like they're overworked because they're only going to work or they're only helping the kids with soccer practice.
Oh my god.
So there are so many Michael Keatons in this movie. And what happens when you make a clone of a clone of a clone?
They start to corrupt.
Lots of clones, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, well.
Yeah, and you know what happens if you make a clone of a clone of a clone of a clone of a clone.
In that way, it's a lesson. It's just a lesson.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I really dug this movie for that lesson because as an adult, we often struggle with time management and spending enough time with our friends, spending enough time with our significant others, spending enough time working, but also for ourselves.
Yeah.
Because we often forget ourselves through all that.
Yes.
So that is where I picked multiplicity.
Love that. And I have my last film, plays with that as well. And Chris, you're going to be proud of me for this one. I'm picking Spider-Man 2. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2.
Yay!
Because that movie is so good when it comes to Peter Parker having to balance responsibility.
Yeah.
Responsibility.
The movie is a Peter Parker movie, not so much a Spider-Man movie, honestly.
And that's what makes it so great, where it's like he has to balance being a student, being a boyfriend to MJ, being Spider-Man, being able to pay rent, and it's a film about like the sacrifices you have to make because in this society we're not built for all of that, and I've had an interesting relationship with Spider-Man 2. I started out not liking it, and then progressively over time it gets better and better whenever I watch it, and now it's like one of these. It's just a fantastic film and quintessential, like you said, Chris, Peter Parker movie because, Peter Parker. That's why people identify with him so much, because they found the demographic of comic readers and made a superhero about them, and that's
Totally.
that's great. We love to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, I'm definitely I think of the three of us, I'm the webhead of the three.
Oh yeah,
I'm the biggest Spider-Man fan of the bunch. And this movie means a lot to me. I grew up loving this movie for its action, for Spider-Man, so many things. But one thing that continuously brings me back to this movie is, like Ethan said, what it is to be a superhero in the sense that you have all these things, and honestly, like, Peter is not all that different from a regular human outside of his powers. Like, honestly, Spider-Man, his job as Spider-Man, you could switch out that as a normal everyday job. This movie is still compelling. And I think that's why this movie works, is because I think someone said this, like you should be able to have an action movie, let's say, strip away every action sequence, and the movie should still work. And I think this movie does do that very well.
Yeah.
Granted, the action does help, and it's great. It's fantastically done.
I don't know if that works for like Mad Max Fury Road or something.
That's true. Yeah. What if?
Because that's just they drive to locations back and forth.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is Ethan, like the whole thing with Peter being he because this is the time in his life where he's moved out from his place with Aunt May. He's trying to pay rent, the guy with the rent, and rent. But then he's like, Spider-Man has to grapple, with all of these different things, his relationship with MJ, blah, 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 blah. And it feels like the weight of the world when you're a young adult and just trying to feed yourself, let alone, go out with a girl and be a superhero, but and the movie, I think, does such a good job of reminding people that, this is not easy. This isn't an easy thing to do. And at the end of the movie, Peter has to make hard decisions about what is it that is most important for him and for the people that he loves. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that's a really mature thing, and granted, every Spider-Man story is essentially what we just described. It's always the kid trying to juggle all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. But I think that's the essence of the character. And I think this movie articulates that better than maybe only matched by Spider-Verse. Maybe?
Yeah,
I don't know.
But Miles is so much younger.
But, and that's a different kind of responsibility.
That's a different coming of age.
And yeah, exactly. Cool. And yeah, I got nothing else to say about that. That's fantastic.
What about you, Brandon? I know you're not the biggest Spider-Man fan, but
it's one of the better Spider-Man movies.
You like this movie enough.
Yeah. I think it's a compelling story with MJ, with Doc Ock and Peter's relationship with Oscorp as well. I think
Right.
that's all great. And you're right. I mean, it is him sort of trying to balance everything as a teenager dash new adult. You know,
Mm-hmm.
he is
Yeah.
out. He's out of high school, and he has to pay rent. He has to do everything, and it's just there's that. Those are like almost the higher stakes of the movie, and that's like the interesting thing is like Raimi doesn't choose to up the stakes via something that's a larger scale, even though it slightly is on a larger scale, but it's more so raising the stakes personally for Peter
Yeah.
because he's got so much more to
Definitely.
lose.
Yeah.
Versus the first Spider-Man, which I mean, in all honesty, he doesn't have MJ yet. All he's really got to lose is James Franco as a friend. If you think about it, and Aunt May, and Uncle Ben. But you know, we'll split hairs,
Uncle
okay?
Ben. God damn it.
Because that's in every Spider-Man movie, with the exception of
It's
the
just,
new
it doesn't mean
trilogy.
anything now.
It doesn't, honestly. I'm sorry. It's one of those things where the more they do it, the less it has an impact for me. Which is why
Even on the
in No Way
previous
Home,
ones.
yeah.
Whoa.
I think because it's become such a played out trope and
Yeah.
almost like a joke of itself, that unfortunately they even make a joke about it in the Spider-Verse trailer,
That's true.
where he's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, at this point, then it's just a joke. It's not really a emotional beat, and it kind of retroactively makes the other moments less meaningful to me. Doesn't mean it is.
Yeah,
I'm
I
just
see that.
saying, if I'm watching it in a vacuum, super impactful, and that's his only thing that he loses in that first movie, I guess. But
Yeah.
I think he has so much more to lose in the second one.
absolutely. And that's
So
sort of
that's
that's sort of like that tells in life too. When you become an adult, like your own personal stakes have raised. You know.
right.
at
If
least
I
with-
lose my job and I live with my parents, I've still got a place to live.
Yeah. But
Mhm.
when you're like completely out on your own, you know,
Yeah.
and you don't have that fallback, it's tough. You know,
Yeah.
Mhm.
it's real tough.
I want to throw in one more movie before we wrap things up here, if that's
Yeah.
okay.
Let's do it.
I want to throw in. I have one honorable mention I'll throw in at the end, but I want to talk very quickly about The Truman Show. I think this is a brilliantly done adulthood movie.
Yeah.
He's like
I think-
almost. It's like Brigsby Bear, kind of, in the way that
Yeah.
it depicts adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
No, you're good. But yeah, Truman Show. It tells the story of a guy who, from the moment he was born, has become the subject of a 24-hour reality TV show. So his reality is completely constructed for him. Every person he has ever interacted with in his life is an actor. And that's a really dark thing, obviously. But the thing is, Truman is such a lovable protagonist because he has like those, like, what's the word? Like very like doughy eyes. You know what I mean? Like a deer. Like, you know what I'm talking about? He
Yeah.
has such a genuineness to him.
Innocence.
And you know, yeah, an innocence, you know, and like, and throughout the movie, you know, his innocence is challenged. He's forced to come to grips with this reality that he has never really seen a crack through before. And by the end of the movie, when it's all kind of laid out for him, and it's like, what do you want to do? And Truman seizes it, you know what I mean? And he decides, like, this is who I am now, and I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna make do, you know. And we were talking earlier about how just getting by when you're an adult, like, that's a challenge in and of itself. But this movie does a great job of kind of like using this hyperbolic concept for this film to articulate what is a very human experience of being thrust into the real world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's the essence of of adulting. Yeah, and yeah, I think this is a great movie as well. Very charming, very sweet, emotional, but also really funny and just enjoyable too. And, I've consistently like looked at this movie and been like, this might be one of my favorite movies of all time.
It
And I think
always
it still
goes up
is.
in my ranking whenever I watch it. It always goes higher.
Yeah.
It's just like Yeah,
Yeah.
it's you know.
Also, like
Yeah.
Jim. Sorry, just quick thing.
Yeah.
Jim Carrey, I love this man so much. I have nothing but love for him. Um, I part of me wishes he got to do one last dramatic role before his retirement.
Yeah,
But we will always have Truman and Eternal Sunshine, and that's already good enough for me.
that's true.
Um,
Because they're gems.
Also, him going out with Sonic 2, like it doesn't get more Jim Carrey than that.
And he's
And he's
fantastic as Eggman. He's really good,
Yeah,
and
he's
I hope,
Yeah, and like
I really
and
hope
he's
they bring
still-
him back for
he's
just
still
one
hop-
more.
yeah, and like he'll still peek his head into like random creative projects. Like he collaborated with The Weeknd on his most recent album,
Yeah,
which
that's
is like
crazy.
okay, like I didn't know you guys were homies, but yeah. Anyway, Truman Show. The quick honorable mention I want to throw in is a 2022 film that only I saw. No one else in our friend group saw this movie because this movie is so small and it had like the tiniest release window. It's called A Love Song. Max Walker Silverman is a director.
Ethan's.
This movie is more like looking back throughout your
yeah.
adulthood because this movie is almost like it's more like an elderly movie. Movie basically.
We already
tells
did
the
old
story
people
of
movies.
Oh yeah, we haven't done. Okay, maybe we'll save this for. But
But that's different.
basically, two childhood sweethearts who are now both widowed share one night in by a lake in the mountains. It's a movie about reflecting upon your life, coming to grips with what was and what was lost, but also what was had, and being appreciative of the experience of life that you had, even if it might not have necessarily gone the way that you wanted. Might be a bit is beyond the scope of I think the three of our experiences in life at the moment.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling one day I will revisit this movie and be very much touched. Yeah, just want to throw this in there as like a great movie to kind of show like that more like the further end of adulthood. Because I feel like we're kind of in that earlier section naturally because we're in that age. But yeah, I want to throw this in there.
I feel like we all have this moment where we realize there's so much more out there. You know?
Oh, dude. I can't wait for you to go to Japan. You'll be faced with how much more there is out there.
I know. And I'm
Ethan's
saying
gonna be
like
watching Oppenheimer there.
it's not coming out in Japan while I'm there.
Not coming, unfortunately. You won't get to see it.
I won't be able to see that or Barbie. Those aren't coming to Japan until
Same.
like August.
Hong Kong's not getting them either.
So
That's too bad.
I know I'm gonna miss the double
Yeah.
feature, but I am gonna discover that the world is bigger, and that's gonna be awesome. And that's more than I could ask for seeing Barbie and telling me whatever that message is gonna be. I don't know what it is because I haven't seen it. But yeah. Oh man, I had an honorable.
I was
mention,
thinking about
but
love.
I forgot it. You were thinking about love. What do you think about
Yeah.
love? About?
I mean, we really didn't tackle it too much outside of the brief mention of it in Worst Person in the World, which is more generalized, I feel like. I would say there's like a few films that I would want to mention. Love and Basketball, balancing career and love. The Apartment,
Oh,
that movie. Ethan.
Oh yeah, you watched that recently, didn't you?
Oh, Brandon, thank you for reminding me. Yes. Oh my god, what a
And an unmarried
incredible-
woman.
Incredible film. The Apartment would absolutely be one of my picks. Oh man. Yeah, it's just like
How?
it's about sacrificing like love and career, you know?
Mhm.
And it does really take place at a time in like this time in our life, you know, where this guy's trying to work up the corporate ladder, you know,
Mhm.
and he gets himself involved in something that's probably morally unethical, you know, to do that, and then he just gets caught up in this really great web of drama and learns that like doing all this work won't get you what you want, you know, won't really get you what you want. It'll get you money, It'll get you out of that apartment, but what do you like? But what do you really want? And that's like
Yeah.
that's another big moment I feel like we all have in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Money buys access and opportunity and pleasure, but not happiness.
Yeah.
Remember that. That's important.
Remember that,
I
everybody.
mean, and that relates to my truly last pick.
Okay.
I feel like we've been saying this.
Yeah.
A Martin Scorsese movie, because I've an unmarried woman, The Apartment, Love and Basketball. They all do a great job at showing somebody balancing their life, their career, what they want to do. But I'm choosing Scorsese's one of his earliest movies that not a lot of people have seen. It's called Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore.
What? She don't live here anymore?
No, she don't.
Why not?
And-
Did she leave?
Well, let's just say
Well.
yes.
For all those wondering.
She's gone.
She's out.
And this is a story about a woman who never fulfilled her dreams from when she was a kid, gets involved in abusive marriage, has a child, and then has to grapple with the fact that she needs to reset her life, but she's almost too far along to do that. So this is like middle-aged adulthood, in her 40s, late 30s. And so like the door is closing on her having a life that is meaningful, I think, to her. And she wants to go to Hollywood. She wants to go somewhere to make her opportunity of being what she wants to do, which is be a singer, a reality. And I think in that sense, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. It really shows somebody's difficulty in balancing parenthood as well as love, because she tries to find love along the way and decides, is it really for her, or does she need to focus more on her career? And should she care more about her son that she's raising? And there's so many like personal layers here that work for me really well. Mostly the performance by Ellen Burstyn and Chris Christopherson, one of his best performances ever. And I just think it's really compelling to see somebody's adult life shown through that lens as it like nears its last act. Because in reality, people should kind of separate their lives into three acts. Their childhood, which is any age from 0 to maybe 17, 18. And then their second act, which is from like 17, 18 to probably like their late 50s, mid 50s. And then the rest is seniority. And so she's just on the edge of that.
Right.
And as the clock is running out and you're forced with time being a real killer, especially to women in the 70s, I think it's just an incredible view of that. I mean, we won't relate necessarily to her journey as a single mother, but I think we'll relate to her desires and needs and wants in relation to who we become and what choices we make.
Yeah, that's true. Dude, it's crazy that he used to make movies like that. You don't really see that from him anymore.
Yeah, it's more like religious and political allegories now, as opposed to like a really great drama or a really great comedy in like After Hours or something.
Yeah.
And I'm not complaining. I like Silence.
The rest of his movies have been great, but I'm just saying, like, it's interesting. His past movies, The Ghosts.
He's got range.
It's interesting, the range. All right, well, let's end this, shall we? So I hope you all learned a lot about, coming into adulthood this episode from, three people who are currently learning it in the middle of it. Learning it.
trying to make do.
Trying to make do with it, we got three Peter Parkers here. No, Brandon said, no, I'm not. I am not Peter Parker. I work at Knott's Berry Farm. Spider-Man doesn't.
I swing from the towers.
No, Brandon, you are kind of like Peter Parker, but instead of putting on a Spider-Man costume, you put on a Snoopy costume. I
don't put on a Snoopy costume anymore.
Yeah, you do. You put on the Snoopy costume. You are Snoopy there. It's more than just a mask. It's who I am. All right. We're all tired. It's been a long day. Adulthood is exhausting. If that's one thing you can get from this episode is that we're fucking exhausted from being adults already. So,
Not me.
all right, cool. All right, bye everybody.
Wait.
What?
Good for you, Brandon.
Our announcement.
Oh, all right.
Oh yes, the big announcement.
The big announcement.
Wow, we almost forgot.
Ethan, you're here this week.
I'm here this week, but I just don't think it's ready yet. I'm gonna be honest. So next episode, I promise.
It's been like a month and a half.
I promise we'll have that announcement for you. I know.
Ethan, it's not
I know.
fair.
I didn't mention the announcement last episode, and I apologize for that. But obviously, it was me and my dog, so I didn't want to announce that with him. I wanted to announce it with the boys, but there's just a few more kinks that we have to get out for this bombastic announcement that we'll be telling you all very soon. So stay tuned to the next episode. And thank you so much for listening. Like, comment, subscribe. I feel like I'm just listing all these just tag words, I feel like I'm just a cog in the machine right now. Just end it. I can't.